I'm going to dive into this session, and then what we're going to do is we're going to close with a song. We're going to give you guys a little bit of a break, and then we're going to come back and have some Q&A time. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. If you've got questions from Pastor Nick's session, make sure you write it down. Questions about counterfeit gospels, questions about the true gospel. And then as you're listening to this message, I want you to think about what questions do you have that pop up as a result of what you're going to hear now. And then what we'll do is we'll collect those during your break. You have a chance to pee, stretch, do whatever you need to do, and then we'll come back in here and have some Q&A time answering those questions until you break out into your small groups. Everybody good with that? Everybody good? If you're good, say I'm good. If you have your Bible, go to Proverbs chapter 3. As you're turning there, I used to live not too far from here. I was on Fort Bragg, North Carolina for 4 years. Anybody familiar with Fort Bragg? Anybody familiar with Fort Bragg? Yeah, it's not too far from here. I was in the 82nd Airborne, jumped out of perfectly good airplanes for a whopping $150 extra a month. I was balling. And I loved my time in the Army. I loved jumping out of airplanes and, the guys that I got to do it with. But I had one particular jump that did not go, it didn't go according to plan. It didn't go very well. I had to pull my reserve parachute on this particular jump. We were loaded up in the middle of the night. When you jump out of airplanes, usually you're jumping at night because usually that's when you would jump into combat, right? You don't jump out in combat during the daytime where they're like, hey, look, there's the guy floating down in the parachute. You're a target. So you jump at nighttime, and so we practiced at nighttime, like early in the morning hours. And on one particular jump, I was the very last jumper out of the plane. And I remember already thinking to myself, like, man, we're going to be pushing it. Like, you've only got so much drop zone. When the light turns green, that means you're over an area that's safe to jump from the plane. And when the light goes red, what do you think that means? Do you think it's good or bad? Bad. You're good. You're catching on really quick. Yeah, don't jump. You may have trees, water, power lines. It may not be clear underneath you. So when it's red, you don't jump. When it's green, you jump. So I'm the very last guy on the plane. I'm thinking like, man, I hope we stay green light the whole time. And we got up to get ready to jump. Everybody's exhausted. We're tired. And we get on the plane. We're loaded on. We drive to the drop zone. And, we stand up and the wind is really bad. On this particular night, the wind levels are really high. So the airplane is not a smooth ride. We're just kind of, jostling around. And we slow down to prepare for jumping. But the green light never comes on. The wind was too high. So we circled around the drop zone and we tried to do another lap. And this happened 2 or 3 times. Guys are starting to get nauseous and sick because of the stopping and slowing and the jostling. And there's guys, because the Air Force wouldn't let us get sick on the plane, we were having to get sick inside of our shirts. So, yeah, it was a real ugly affair, to say the least. So guys are sick and nauseous. Our shoulders hurt, our necks hurt. It's the most uncomfortable thing ever. And finally, we approach the drop zone again, and we get a green light. And you could just hear everybody on the plane starts cheering, like we're pumped. And guys start flying out the door, right? And you're wearing all kinds of equipment. You've got a parachute on your back. You've got a rucksack that you normally carry on your back hooked onto a harness right here that's covering your leg. So you've got like a 70-pound rucksack here. You've got like a 40, 50-pound chute on your back. And you don't walk, you waddle. Because you can't move your legs forward because you're kicking a rucksack. So you go sideways. And this is how we got. Here's all the guys right here going towards the door of the airplane. And our shoulders hurt, our necks hurt, people are sick, and they're going out. So I'm waddling towards the back. I'm the last guy, and I'm pushing. I'm like, let's go. And as we're getting close to the door, the light's still green. I'm feeling good, like, okay, I'm going to get out of here. The guy in front of me is ready to go out, and as he's handing off his static line to give to the jump master and turn to go out, the light turns red, and he jumps. And I'm thinking to myself, all in one little instant, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be on the plane by myself. I'm not doing that. And so I hand off my jump line, and I jump out right behind him. Red light for a good 3 or 4 seconds, for sure. So I jump out of the airplane and I start counting. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, as you're supposed to do. And when you get to 4, your chute should deploy. And my chute did. It deployed. It flew out, except for when it deployed, it blew my helmet off of my head, blew my Kevlar off my head. And I noticed that my head was down like this, and I couldn't get it up. I couldn't look up. And I didn't know what was going on, but I was like, okay, that's not good. So I began to feel around, and I could feel that my straps, the parachute, right, goes to 4 lines, and your canopy's out like this. My straps were so tangled that they were twisted up like you would twist a swing set, all the way down to where my neck was. And so I'm pulling, and I'm trying to get my head out, and I finally squeezed my head out and looked and realized it was a complete mess above me. And I was like, man, that doesn't look like it's doing anything at this point. Is that catching air? How's things going right now? So I knew, well, here's what we're trained to do. If your risers are twisted up, you've got a bicycle kick. You're supposed to bicycle kick. Everybody know what bicycle kicking is, right? Where you just, like this right here. I'm not sure why they have you do it. I think it's because they want you to stay busy until you die. Because it didn't do anything when I was kicking. I was like Lance Armstrong up there, and nothing was happening. I was kicking, and all of a sudden, as I'm kicking, I realized, like, nothing's happening. So I start looking to find out, okay, like, how fast am I falling? It's dark. I can't see what's going on. Now, let's do a little test here. I don't want to say to see how smart you are, because you might fail this, but let's see how you do. If I'm the last jumper who jumps out of the plane, I should be at what place in the air compared to everyone else? You are smart. Look at you guys. You're crushing it right here. You're crushing it. The highest. I should be up above everybody. When I start looking around, guys, I'm looking up to find people. So at this point, I go, I'm not the smartest guy from Tennessee, but I know this isn't good at all. And so immediately I'm like, okay, I got to pull my reserve. And so I grab my reserve, I yank out the cord, and out goes my chute. And it catches air. I slow down. I could tell at that point, like, okay, yep, I needed that. That was good. And as it slows me down, here's what starts happening. My other parachute starts untangling. So I'm going through the air like this. I'm literally falling through the sky, and I can't remember, but I feel like I was screaming the whole time, like, ah! Really G.I. Joe stuff here, guys. Really, top-notch Navy SEAL kind of stuff here. So I'm falling, and all of a sudden it hits me. I've got to drop all my gear. I've got to get all this gear off me. You're not supposed to land with these things on your legs. It'll break your legs. And I've got my rifle on my side. Like, this is not going to go well. So I immediately go to grab the release harness. And as I grab the release harness, I hit feet, knees, face into the ground. I know. You should have been there. It hurt a lot. I remember hitting, and I remember sitting there for a minute, and I was like, am I dead right now? Did I just die? And then I was like, no, like I taste sand right now. I'm pretty sure that's sand. And so I just sat there and wiggled stuff for a few minutes. I was like, I think I'm alive right now. And I get up and I start collecting my gear. Somebody found my helmet like a football field away. And they're like, man, God bless Reed. Man, he was a good dude, It's like, no, guys, I'm over here. I made it. But listen, it was a terrifying experience. Most dudes will go their entire Army career, parachute, will never pull their reserve. Here I am pulling my reserve parachute, and I had to go up 2 days later again. And I remember thinking like, okay, like this is what I do. I'm a paratrooper. Like you don't get to be a paratrooper and be like, I'm going to sit it out, guys. It's like, no, it's time to get back up there. And I did. Because here's what I knew. I had to trust not only my gear, but I had to trust my training. And the reason I'm bringing up this idea of trust with you is because one of the most frequent commands in the Bible is to trust the Lord. It's to trust God. And to put trust in God means to put confidence in, to rely upon. When you trust something or someone, you're putting confidence in them. You're relying on them for something. And here's the reality. You're called to live your life in reliance on God, in complete confidence in God. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, guys, is because of this. In life, you're going to go through troubles. We talked about that in my first message. You're going to experience hardships. You're going to have, listen, things in the future that you're concerned about but don't have control over. There's going to be things that you worry about. There's going to be things you have a concern for. I want to make sure that test goes well. I want to make sure I get into that college. I want to make sure my job doesn't, I don't lose it. I want to make sure I find a spouse. I want to make sure my spouse is faithful. I want to go down the line of all the things that you don't control, but you will hope the future goes well for you. And the only thing you're left to do in those moments, watch this, when you are faced with a situation or a circumstance where you're not in control, is you can either trust God or you can lean on your own understanding. And when you lean on your own understanding, this is where fear, anxiousness, depression, restlessness, anxiety, these are the fruits of living our life leaning on our own understanding. And as a pastor for over 16 years and walking through this in my own life, walking with others who are going through trials, here's what I have discovered. Trials and tribulations are not uncommon. Those are common. Everybody's going to go through those. We just talked about that earlier. Everyone's going to go through trials. Here's what's uncommon. You know what's uncommon? Watching people go through trials who trust God. That's uncommon. And I wish I could stare at you and say, it's uncommon for the unbelieving world, but not for us, church. We're killing it. Not for us, Christians. We're out here trusting God. We're showing the way. No, it's uncommon amongst us as well. So what I want to look at briefly, if you'll lock in with me, I promise you, I'll keep this much of your time. I want to show you how you can learn to trust God. I want to show you where trusting God comes from. And if you'll learn how to do this, listen, it won't necessarily change all the circumstances you go through. But what it will change is how you go through them. Let's look together at Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. You're probably familiar with this text. In fact, your mom or dad may have a little picture on their wall with this verse on it, maybe a pretty little coffee mug or something like that with it. This is one of those verses, this is one of those passages that everybody loves to quote, but none of us love to live. We love to say it. We don't necessarily always know how to do it. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Let me read it for us. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Look at your neighbor and tell him, say, trust in the Lord. Tell him. And now look at him and say this. Look at him and say this. Do not lean on your own understanding. Say it. I want you to see these two things. I want you to see these two things as a contrast to each other. You can't trust the Lord, gang, and lean on your own understanding. You can't do both. To trust the Lord means you are putting full confidence, full reliance on God with your life, with your circumstances. Notice here, look down at your Bible in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with what? How much of your heart? Not some of it, not with a piece of your heart. He's going to say, trust in the Lord with a piece of your heart. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, all yourself, your full being. With all of your heart. And watch this. And do not lean on your own understanding. Let me show you what the picture of this leaning is. This verb to lean. Imagine with me if we were to lay our bodies against a wall and we angled it in such a way that we eventually got to a place where the wall was doing all the work to hold up your body. You with me? You're leaning against the wall, and if for some reason that wall gave way, you would fall. You're leaning on that wall. This is what the scriptures say. Do not lean on your own understanding. When you're going through trials, suffering, pain, struggles, when there's uncertainties about what tomorrow's going to bring, when you're worried about that relationship, when you're worried about that test result, when you're worried about that ache that you've got in your stomach and you're hoping it's not something bigger than what it is. When you realize that your control is minimum and the opportunity for fear or trust arises, are you going to lean on your own understanding or trust God? Trusting God doesn't mean you don't care about what happens. You absolutely care about what happens to your friends, to you, to your relationships, to your future. But what you're going to see is that leaning on your own understanding is a recipe for anxiety and depression and fear and for worry. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a second about what ways that we lean on our own understanding. But then look what he says in verse 6. In all your ways, acknowledge him. Acknowledge him, and he will make your straight your paths. Let me ask you a question. What word do you see there inside the word acknowledge? Knowledge, and let's break it down further. What word do you see inside of knowledge? I've had ledge. I knew somebody would say ledge. There's always that guy. He just did it. All right, so know. Watch this. To know. He's not saying in all your ways, acknowledge him, like tip the cap to God. Say, hey, how you doing, God? I acknowledge you. In all of your ways, what? All your ways, know him. Listen, you can't trust someone you don't know. You can't trust God if you don't know God, gang. Do you know how you trust anybody in your life? You've come to know them. The more you come to know somebody, listen, this is it right here. You ready? The more you come to know somebody, the more you either know that you can trust them or not trust them. See, I wish I could say, hey, the more you get to know somebody, the more you can trust them. It's like, actually, the more you get to know some people, the less you trust them. You know why? Because you discover their character. Are you going to bank your life on someone whose character you can't trust? They don't ever do what they say they're going to do. You can't trust them with a secret because they're going to tell somebody. See, you know somebody well enough, you know whether or not you can trust them or not. So here's the question. How do you grow to trust God? You grow in knowing him. And I wish I could unpack this in full today, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep this really condensed. I write about this in the book out there on the table, Uncommon Trust. The way that you grow to know God is you have to know God as he has revealed himself in his word. And that isn't just like an abstract idea. That's not just like a Christian answer. Here's what I mean by this. When you begin to recognize God as sovereign over your life. Remember we sang that this morning, oh, sovereign God, you are the Lord over all. What we mean is that not only he has all power, but he's holding your life. Friends, you realize you're not here by accident, right? You realize your life isn't a random, spontaneous, chance existence. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, he wrote every day of your life in his book before one came to pass. Psalm 139:16. You are not an accident. You are not a cosmic accident. You are made by a God who made you intentionally. And you know what that means? That means the things that happen and come into your life, there's a sovereign God over it. A sovereign God who is also wise in all of his ways. And everything that God designs and plans, there's wisdom. You know what that means? God can never make the wrong choice about what to bring about. Now, that doesn't mean that everything he brings about, we're going to see the wisdom in. Doesn't mean that we're going to love what he brings about. In the wisdom of God, he brings about things in our lives often that are painful. This is why Tim Keller once said this: if you knew what God knew, you would pray for everything he gives you. If you knew what God knew, but you don't. So you know what you have to do? Trust him. You trust his wisdom. And you need to also remember this: the God who sovereignly oversees your life and is in wisdom bringing about the plans that he has for you. Watch this. This is the God who loves you. Not a generic love either. A particular love. A love that knows every hair on your head kind of love. So you need to know that if God allows for a trial to come into your life, think about Joseph's life. I mean, we read the Bible with such tame little lenses, and we forget, like, dude, Joseph was in prison for 2 years after a lady lied about his intentions with her, and after his brothers threw him in jail, threw him into the pit to leave him for dead, then sold him. We read that, it's like, yep, and his brothers did that. Like, that. Think about being Joseph. And yet at the end of his day, what did he say? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. When you're in your trials, you need to remind yourself, God is over my life. He's wise in all that he does. So if he brings me to this place, I know he does it out of his love for me as well. The more you know God and his character, the more you will trust him. And I could go down all the attributes of God and show that the more you know God as he is, not as you make him to be. Do you know what it's called when you fashion a God that's not really God? What does the Bible call that? An idol. You can't fashion and worship a God of your own making, or you're worshiping an idol. You need to know the God who is revealed in Scripture. The more you know that God, the more, listen, you will trust him. And guys, I told you my story already. So you know that I'm not talking to you about trusting God without having to live it. It'd be one thing if I was standing up here like, oh, come on, guys, just trust him. And I'm over here living in a breeze. I'm sharing this with you because my family's had to cling to this. When you bury your 15-year-old son and you're holding your daughters and your wife, and all you can say is, guys, God is in control. And he's wise and he's loving. And we can trust him even in our pain. What you're going to discover is that trusting God is not something you can flip on and off like a light switch, y'all. It's cultivated. It's developed. And you know how it's developed? It's developed the same way you develop trust with your friends or anyone else. It takes intentional time knowing them. Are you walking with God right now? I know you're in a Christian school. You may be in a Christian home, and you may go to a nice Christian church. I'm asking you, are you walking with him? Because I can promise you, guys, listen, the moment you need trust to be there, it's not going to be in that moment what you have done then. It's going to be what you've done before that will determine whether or not you've got trust in him. You need to be cultivating it, running after it, developing it day after day after day in walking with God. In all your ways, acknowledge him, know him, and he will make your path straight. He is going to lead you ultimately where he wants you to go and where he has for you to be. But let me tell you what our biggest enemy to trusting God is. It's not just our neglect of knowing him. That's one. If you want to write a note down, one of the reasons you don't trust God is the neglect of spending time to know him. Not knowing the character of the God you trust and serve and worship. That's one reason. Here's the second reason. You and I lean on our own understanding most of the time. And this is what it looks like. Have you ever noticed that you and I are storytellers by nature? And I don't mean like, hey, guys, let me tell you about this parachute story. I mean, like, did you know that inside of your head at all times, you are always telling yourself a story? Did you realize that? When you don't have information about something, do you know what you tend to do? You fill the gap in with a story. Your friend's late for school. You look over, they're not in the seat, and you go, I wonder if they're not feeling good this morning. Like, you have no idea what's going on. What did you just do? You just filled in the information with a story. Oh, I bet they're late. They never get up on time. They always sleep. He's always staring at the mirror forever, fluffing his hair. Like, I bet. Don't look at him right now, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So, right, you tell a story. You fill the gap in with a story. You do this all the time. I remember when I was a kid, we lived out in the country. That's what we call it in Tennessee, out in the woods, out in the sticks. And I would hear noises all night long outside my window. When I was a kid, I just hear pops and creaks. And every time I thought like, yep, it's happening. Somebody's killing us tonight. It's going to happen. Like somebody's going to break in. We're dead. The Navy SEALs of bad guys are right outside. And my dad's not even budging out in there. Right, I hear a pop. I jump out of bed. I'd be like, I put my ear up to the wall. Like they were going to be like, hey, yeah, it's us, Eric. We're out here. It's like, my heart's racing. I'd peek out of my door to see if my dad moved from the couch. Like, did he hear that? Nope, Dad's just chilling still. He didn't move. We're dead. Dad doesn't care. We're going to die because Dad's just sitting there, Every night, listen, I did this nightly. Like my little 10-year-old heart, I'm surprised didn't fall apart and drop from how hard it would race all night. Until I think I finally just fell asleep in exhaustion every night. Convinced bad guys were waiting to come in the house. I was telling myself a story every single night. Every noise had a person attached to it. Every little crick, every little crack, every little something, I had an entire narrative like, yep, there they are. They're flanking around like they're about to come through the window. And now I've grown up, and I don't sit up at night worrying about the house popping and cracking or noise outside, thinking that the bad guy Navy SEALs are coming in. But I haven't stopped telling stories because we all do it. And the stories that we tell ourselves internally, listen, are usually terrible. When we're interpreting what's going to happen, when we're worried about our future, when we feel that all of a sudden my neck's sore, it's like, oh my gosh, my neck's sore, like, oh man, I hope it's not cancer. It's like, it's what we do. We go right to this, like, it's hurting. It's been hurt for like 2 days. Like, I don't want to go to the doctor because they're going to tell me I'm dying. Or, hey, there's a test coming up. There's a test, guys, next week. And here you go. You're like, oh, man, oh, gosh, I'm not going to do good on that test. And if I don't do good on that test, I'm not going to make a good grade. If I don't make a good grade, I'm going to get grounded. If I get grounded, I'm not going to get to go hang out with my friends. If I don't get to go hang out with my friends, I'm going to be outside the group. If I'm outside the group, I'm a loser. And adults do it too. We don't ever stop doing it. Hey, there's going to be layoffs at the plant. Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be one of them. No doubt, I'm one of them. And then all of a sudden, it's like, if I lose my job, I won't have money to pay the house payment. If I don't have money to pay the house payment, we're going to lose our home. I'm going to have to go borrow money from somebody. I'm going to have to move in with my in-laws. And meanwhile, here we are. I may not be one of them at all, but I've already told myself a story that, watch this. Here's my whole point. Watch this. The whole point is this. The stories you tell yourself don't stay contained in your head. They affect your heart. You want to know where your anxiety and depression comes from? You want to know your fears and worries come from? They don't just poof out of nowhere. They come from the stories you tell yourself. They come from the leaning on your own understanding that you are a black belt at. You're an expert, ninja level skills in leaning on your own understanding. And if you lean on your own understanding, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get the fruit of leaning on your own understanding, which is not trusting God, it's despair. it's anxiety, it's worry, it's fear. Guys, you do this without thinking about it. You do this on autopilot. And what I'm going to encourage you as I'm wrapping up this time, here's my encouragement to you. You've got to learn to take, as 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, every thought captive. And you've got to stop letting your thoughts give birth to more thoughts, which are ultimately just creating your fear and your worry and your anxiety and your depression and your insecurities. That is what you've got to take captive. You've got to stop telling those stories to yourself. You know why? Because here's what you're doing when you tell yourself those stories. You're trying to play God. Do you see what I'm talking about? You see why? Because what you're doing is you're basically attempting to write your future in your own head rather than trusting the God who holds your future. And taking your thoughts captive and preaching to yourself. Put off the storytelling that goes in the negative direction. Put it off and put on the practice of repeating to yourself the truth. God is sovereign over my life, every bit of it. And in His wisdom, He brings about the things that come into my life. And He always plans my life according to His great love for me. And He is a faithful God. So if He puts me into the furnace, I'm going to trust He's got a purpose for me in that furnace. And if He chooses not to rescue me from the furnace, then I'll trust His love and wisdom in that too. Friends, do you not think, listen, my son would be sitting in these seats with y'all today. When I look at your faces, I could see him with you. This is real to me. When I say trust Him, preach to yourself the truth. I'm still having to do that every single day because trust is cultivated every day. I have to keep preaching to myself the truth that one day, because of Christ, I'll be reconciled to my son because He was in Christ and we are in Christ. And Christ is coming again to make all things new and to restore that which was broken. The dead will be raised and we'll live forever with Him. I'm clinging to promises. I'm putting on the truth. I have to be reminded every day that God will give me the grace for this day. I don't need tomorrow's grace. I don't need next week's grace. I don't need next year's grace. Last year, I remember I caught myself letting the story go. I was telling a story. You know the story I was telling myself? It started making me anxious. You know what the story was? Man, I wonder if in 40 years, I'm going to remember what my son's voice sounded like. You know what the story I started telling myself was? I wonder if my little girls, when they're adults, are going to remember anything about their brother who died when they were kids. And it started bothering me. As it rightfully should, right? It started bothering me. My heart started getting heavy. I started getting anxious. And you know what I realized in that moment? Stop. What are you doing? What are you doing getting worked up about 40 years from now? What? Eric, the God who's with you today will be with you 40 years from now. Trust God for today. I don't need to trust Him for 40 years from now. I need today's grace. I need to know that the God who is faithful is the God who will be with me on that day too. And so rather than getting worked up right now, you see what I have to do? Take the thought captive, put it off, and go back to the truth. That's how trust is cultivated. God, I trust You. I trust You. And I'm going to trust You today to help me to get through the things that I'm facing. Friends, I'll wrap up with this. For you to trust God with your life doesn't come just because you have easy circumstances. Guys, anybody can trust God when life is smooth. The question for you is this: will you trust Him when you're face to face with a lot of uncertainties? When you realize you don't control the next moment or the next move, and you're at the end of yourself, and your temptation is to go ahead and fill the gap and fill the story in with what's going to happen instead of being at peace with the God who is trustworthy. Problems and trials and uncertain futures are common. What's uncommon are people like you and me living at peace in the midst of those uncertainties because we actually trust the Lord with all of our hearts. May God teach you to know Him. May a desire birth in you to know Him. Friends, I hope you don't have to wait until you're my age to trust Him. That you'll start cultivating now that trust that will carry you through a lifetime. That no matter what comes in or out of your life, you can know that His grace is always sufficient for you. He's a very present help in your times of need. And He will, if you will trust Him and acknowledge Him, He will make straight your paths. He can't do otherwise because He's promised to do so in His Word.